Business news now, and oil prices have skyrocketed after the OPEC group of energy exporters sprung a surprise output cut on the market. Big oil producers, led by Saudi Arabia, vowed to cut supply by 1 million barrels a day, or 4% of the group's outputs. The move caught investors in their tracks after a number of OPEC officials had suggested that production quotas would remain in place through the year. The move risks fueling already high inflation and threatens to create even more tension between the US and its erstwhile Middle East ally, Saudi Arabia. With more on this story and the rest of the day's business news, including a hiccup in the Swiss bank mega merger, let's cross over to London to speak to Arise business correspondent Laurie Laird. Good to see you, Laurie. So oil prices rocketing in the wake of this surprise cut to the world supply of crude oil. How much of a shock was this move?
This was an absolute shock, Charles. Although looking back, I wonder why we were all shocked. So many OPEC officials have said they really want to see oil at $100 a barrel. Oil had slipped almost down to $70 a barrel over the month of March. We were down 14% on the year, and we were well below where we were when Putin invited. Have been so surprised about this. OPEC has made it clear that $70 a barrel is not very comfortable for them. But the reason it was such a surprise is because so many OPEC officials over the past month or so have said we don't see any change in production quotas for the rest of the year. Well, we all could see that the oil price was lower than what we think OPEC wants. So many OPEC committee was meant to meet this week, and we expected some kind of announcement after that, even if the announcement was that we're not going to change things. So this announcement coming on a Sunday ahead of a formal meeting really caught everybody by surprise.
Yes, and just to let you know, Laurie, your line was dragging a bit there. Sounded a little bit wonky. Let's hope it holds through to the end of the chat, because what you're telling us is very interesting indeed. And there are fears, aren't there, that this will further increase inflation, and it seems it'll also help Russia.
Absolutely, on both counts. It will it has to fuel inflation, right? A lot of central bankers had been counting on it out of inflation, which rose to about 10% in so many developed nations, the highest that we've seen in over 40 years. But I've been quite surprised today. We have seen a couple of, at least of U.S. central bankers have come out. A man called James Bullard, who sits on the rate setting committee of the Federal Reserve, and he was really rather casual, rather sanguine about a rise toward the end of the year. We expected that with China's recovery, there would be a greater demand for oil, and so that's why we were looking for a rise anyway. So he sounded pretty casual about inflation. In any case, central bankers have made it very clear, at least at this juncture, that they're looking at what's called core inflation. So they're stripping out food and energy, those volatile items, and just looking at what is left, and that's what they're most concerned about. But certainly this will fuel a rise in headline inflation without a doubt.
I have to say again that what you're telling us is very interesting, but your line is making me enormously nervous. Let's persevere and hope that it takes us through to the very end. Have we had reaction from the US, Laurie? President Joe Biden didn't hide his unhappiness when OPEC cut output in October.
I can hear you perfectly, Charles. So it's frustrating that we're not having two ways. The Americans have again been really quite casual about this. We had a written statement from the National Security Council just saying that they think this cut is not advisable. But remember, back in October, as you so rightly pointed out, Joe Biden was furious, absolutely furious, when OPEC cut production. In fact, you'll remember Joe Biden going kind of holding his nose, going to Saudi Arabia after he had threatened to make Saudi Arabia a pariah on the campaign trail. We can see him with Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and Joe Biden looks very uncomfortable. And the feeling was back in October that Joe Biden went all the way to Saudi Arabia, tried to talk oil with some speculation, Charles, that Saudi Arabia may have engineered this move. And Saudi Arabia was very much leading this move to cut production. But there had been some reporting that Saudi Arabia was frustrated that America hasn't started to replenish its strategic reserves. It ran those strategic reserves down in order to keep oil prices down. Oil prices are a very emotive and political issue in the U.S. Hasn't come back to the open market and started to replenish those reserves. Because if America had started to do that, that would have lifted the price of oil a little bit. But I think this really raises some questions. Remember, Saudi Arabia has made some degree of detente with Iran at the behest deal. And I think there's a feeling now, has Saudi Arabia moved into a Chinese sphere of influence?
Yeah, well, let's see if we can manage one more question, Laurie, which is an important one. And I wonder if this will have much of an effect on Nigeria.
Certainly anything that lifts the price of oil will help Nigeria a great deal. This 6% rise in Brent crude today, and perhaps we'll see more of it in days to come, will certainly help Nigeria. Oil is still such an important part, such an important foreign exchange earner for Nigeria. But interestingly enough, Nigeria over the past 2 months has been increasing its oil production. Now, for months or most of last year, we talked about Nigeria's decreasing oil production. So much was getting stolen, so much was leaking out of pipes that hadn't been maintained. Nigeria has managed to get a bit of a handle on that, and production is rising, has risen quite a bit over the past 2 months in Nigeria, still below that 1.6 million barrel a day target that Nigeria is trying to hit this quarter, and still below that 1.8 million barrel a day OPEC quota for Nigeria. But certainly this price rise and increasing production out of Nigeria will be very, very helpful to the Treasury.
Laurie, thanks very much indeed. We managed to limp to the end there through no fault of yours, of course. Your analysis spot on, but the line not holding up very well. But we got there. Laurie, Laird in London.